Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this presentation from the Theosophical Society in America. My name is John Gianchosi. I'm the Director of Public Programs, and I'm happy to be with you this evening. The Theosophical Society promotes study, meditation, and service. We encourage open-minded inquiry into the world religions, philosophy, science, and the arts. And we also have a deep respect for the unity of all life. Our goal is to help people explore the spiritual path so as to arrive at a deeper understanding regarding the wisdom of the ages. Furthermore, we feel that this wisdom is not limited to any one tradition, and thus we offer programs from all traditions. I invite you to visit our website, scroll down under programs, and there you'll find a full listing of what we are currently offering. Many of these programs are online and interactive, so you can participate in them regardless of your physical location. However, we also have some in-person programs at our national headquarters in Wheaton, Illinois. One program that I wish to mention in particular this evening is the online workshop Clairvoyance and Creating Your Own Sacred Space. It is being taught by Kurt Leland, and it is on Saturday, March 19 from 1 to 3:30 p.m. Kurt Leland has taught many workshops for us and given many lectures. He is a wonderful person, very inspiring in what he shares. I do hope you can join us for that workshop on Saturday. Now, for this evening's lecture, we have Charlie Morley, who is a best-selling author and teacher of lucid dreaming, shadow integration, and mindfulness of dream and sleep. He has been lucid dreaming for over 20 years and was authorized to teach within the Kagyu School of Tibetan Buddhism by Lama Yeshe Rinpoche in 2008. Since then, he has written 4 books that have been translated into 15 languages and has run workshops and retreats in more than 20 countries. In 2018, he was awarded the Winston Churchill Fellowship Grant for research into PTSD treatment in veterans, and continues to teach people with trauma-affected sleep. His 2021 book, Wake Up to Sleep, is a practical guide to these practices. Charlie has been the lead consultant on scientific studies into lucid dreaming at both Swansea University and the Institute of Noetic Sciences. This evening he will speak on, quite appropriately, lucid dreaming, exploring the what, why, how, and wow. I hope you enjoy this presentation.
Hello and welcome. My name is Charlie Morley, and I am very pleased to be offering you this talk looking at the what, why, how, and wow of lucid dreaming. Essentially, this is going to be an introductory talk on the huge topic of lucid dreaming, in which I'm going to try and cover the basics from both the Western psychological and scientific points of view, as well as from the Tibetan Buddhist points of view. So, first off, what is a lucid dream? A lucid dream is a dream in which you're actively aware of the fact that you're dreaming as the dream is happening. So if you've ever had a dream where you're sound asleep and within the dream, you have the self-reflective awareness to go, wow, this is all a dream, that was lucidity. So a lucid dream is defined by the moment of being in the dream, still sound asleep, and saying to yourself, reflecting to yourself, aha, I'm dreaming. So a lucid dream is not just a really vivid dream, although it's kind of problematic with the words we use there, because lucidity as a word connotes ideas of clarity, clear seeing. So it would probably be better if we called lucid dreaming conscious dreaming, because the defined aspect of lucidity is conscious awareness. But anyway, we're stuck with this term lucid dreaming. So it's not just a really vivid dream. It is not a dream in which you see future events and then future events come to pass. That might be a prophetic dream, for example. And it is not the subjective experience of your sense of self or your energy or your mind stream leaving the physical body and exploring the world around you. That might be what's called astral projection or an outer body experience. Now, your lucid dream may well be very vivid, may well contain prophetic elements, and may well lead to an outer body experience. But by definition, that's not what makes it a lucid dream. So anytime you've been in a dream and you've gone, wow, I'm dreaming, that was lucidity. And it doesn't really matter how long you were in that state of awareness for. Like for most people, their first experience of lucid dreaming goes something like this. Dream, completely lost in lack of awareness. Then something weird happens. My dead grandmother appears or a dog starts talking. You go, hang on, that can't happen in real life. I'm dreaming. Whoa, I'm dreaming. And you wake up and you're in bed going, wow, what was that I just experienced for all of 3 to 5 seconds? So it's a very common experience if that's happened to you. And it doesn't matter. That still counts as lucidity. That still counts as recognition. And recognition, not only within the Buddhist teachings on lucidity and the spiritual path, but actually in so many other spiritual traditions, recognition is the key. Can we recognize the mind beyond illusion? Can we recognize the truth? Can we have a recognition beyond ignorance, that which does not know? So it doesn't matter how long your lucid dreams are to begin with, but my job is to teach you how to have longer lucid dreams. And of course, in the workshop that I'm offering with Theosophical Society, we will be exploring exactly that, the how. How do we actually have these experiences? So a lucid dream is any dream where you know that you're dreaming as the dream is happening. So that aha moment of, wow, I'm dreaming, actually has neurophysiological correlates. And it's really important to explore those because although I may be preaching to the converted, this is Theosophical Society America, you guys are probably super open-minded and have, a really expanded awareness toward these kind of subjects. Maybe your friends or loved ones don't. And maybe you're going to come back from this talk and over dinner, you might say to your loved one, I just learned about lucid dreaming. And they say, hey, that's bull. It doesn't exist. It's not real. So I think it's really important that we know that it is real and that we learn about some of the science. So when you have that moment in a lucid dream of, wow, I'm dreaming, part of the brain becomes activated. So here's my half a brain. Please, no jokes about where my other half of my brain is. When you are having a non-lucid dream, so your everyday dreams, and remember, 99.9% of all our dreams are non-lucid. Because although we might have the odd spontaneous lucid dream, for most people, lucidity is quite a rarity. So most of the time when we're dreaming, the brain looks like this. Loads of activity in the back part of the brain. This is the brain stem, visual cortex, occipital lobe, loads of activity here. This is kind of, if you think of like an old school projector in a cinema, this is where the projector sits, and almost as if the kind of prefrontal cortex is the screen in which you watch it. When you are in a non-lucid dream, loads of activity in the back part of the brain, very little activity here in the prefrontal cortex. In fact, most of the time when we dream, there's a complete deadening of activity. This is switched off. And you can see this in MRSI brain scans, fMRI brain scans. When they were first looking at whether lucidity was real back in the 70s, they weren't working on a neurological basis. They were trying to find some way to prove that it was possible. And they actually did. In 1975 at Hull University in the UK, they first proved lucid dreaming as a real phenomena. And the way they did it was with eye movements. They would become lucid and then flick their eyes left to right, which would then be picked up by eye motion monitors in the waking state and prove that they knew they were in there. But in the 2010, 2011, around 2009, big renaissance in lucid dreaming. And that's when they started doing the neurological studies. So what they assumed would happen was they thought, well, what we think is going to happen is when someone becomes lucid, that front part of the brain is going to light up because scientists believe that the sense of self resides within the prefrontal cortex. Now, of course, I think that's a ridiculous statement. How does our sense of self reside there as much as it resides in our little finger? But they might say that so let's say the sense of self seems to be activated with the neural correlates around the prefrontal cortex. So they assumed that when someone became lucid, this front part of the brain would light up, indicating that, wow, I'm aware, because the sense of self, the sense of agency, the sense of self-reflective awareness seems to be to live or be triggered in this area of the brain. Now, how to get an image of somebody's brain while they're sleeping and lucid dreaming? I don't know if you've ever been in an fMRI scanner before. I have. I used to live in a Buddhist center, and every now and again, scientists would come to the Buddhist center looking for long-term meditators who changed their brain. And when they couldn't find any of them, they came to me. So I'm sure I completely skewed the results of the study. But in one of those studies, we had to go into this brain scanner and try and meditate. And in these brain scanners, they're so noisy. They're like a techno rave. When they switch them on, this magnet spins around in the back and it goes, duck, 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 duck. I could barely stay aware in there, let alone go to sleep. But this guy in Germany, a very proficient lucid dreamer, managed to go to sleep in one of those fMRI scanners, which take a live image of the brain. Not only was he able to go to sleep, he was able to have a lucid dream. So for the first time ever, we were able to get real-time imagery of what happens in the brain once we become lucid. And what happened was exactly what they theorized would happen. That part of the brain was highly active. And then suddenly, boom, the front part of the brain lit up like a Christmas tree. They let it light up for about 30 seconds. And then crucially, they woke him up. And of course, his subjective experience correlated exactly with what had happened. He had been having a lucid dream. So what can we learn from that? We learn that lucid dreaming is a neurological phenomenon. This is nothing kind of psychological about this. Is nothing you have to believe in. This is a real phenomenon. Now, one of the most important findings from this brain imagery study was not just the part of the brain that lit up, but what that part of the brain does. And crucially, they found out that when the prefrontal cortex is activated, the brain starts to lay down neural pathways in exactly the same way as if we were awake. This means that neuroplasticity is engaged within the lucid dream, which means we can change our brain while we sleep. Now, that sounds like a real kind of mic drop soundbite moment, but it's actually totally true. Once the prefrontal cortex activates, the brain doesn't think you're having a lucid dream. The brain thinks you are awake. Now, there's an interesting philosophical point there. As far as the brain's concerned, wakefulness has nothing to do with having your eyes open. Wakefulness, or this conscious experience, is predicated upon activation of certain brain regions. But that's a whole other discussion to have about brain science and materialism. So they thought, well, this is crazy. This means if neuroplasticity is engaged in the lucid dream, could we learn in a lucid dream? Could we actually get better at stuff through lucid dreaming? And they found out, yes, you can. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. One of the first studies they did was at Heidelberg University. And it was quite a big study. They had like over 100 German athletes, because they thought if we can work with something that's really physical, we can get really kind of tight correlates on this. We can see, did they get stronger? Could they do more of their sport, whatever it was? So they decided to work with athletes. Over 100 German athletes, they trained in lucid dreaming, then got them down to a group of about 25 who could really kind of learn to do it. This took a few months, which is about right. Takes a few weeks, couple of months to really kind of stabilize lucid dreaming. And then once these German athletes became lucid, out of all the amazing things that they could spend their lucid dreams doing, communing with God, doing their spiritual practice, transforming into a tantric deity, asking questions about the meaning of life, they were tasked with doing one thing and one thing only: squats. Literally the things you do in the gym, right? Squats like that. And they measured how many squats they could do before. Then they went into the lucid dream and had to practice squats. And those who were able to do so, they then measured afterwards. Long story short, practicing squats in your lucid dreams leads to the ability of doing more squats in the waking state. They actually got better. In fact, some of them reported increased muscle mass. Now, that's a funny one, because I checked the footnotes on that one. That can't be right, because they're not actually doing the squats. So the increased muscle mass wasn't from doing the squats in the dream, but it was that by doing squats in the lucid dream, it strengthened the neural pathways in the action of doing the squat, meaning the next day they could do more than their personal best. Of course, that led to increased muscle mass. If this kind of sounds Star Trek-y and sci-fi, it should. This is the stuff that really excites me. It's studies like this that makes me want to run out onto the street and go, have you heard about lucid dreaming? You can actually change your physical body through lucid dreaming. This is nuts. So I decided to be part of one of these studies. And in 2019, I was. There was a lucid dream study that I saw advertised. Well, kind of they let me know about it, but I did see it advertised as well. They needed martial artists who were good at lucid dreaming. I thought, yes, because I love kickboxing and martial arts. And obviously I love lucid dreaming. So I thought, me. And signed up for this study. And we had to go into the lucid dream and do a very specific kick sequence, like a kickboxing, kind of martial arts, kung fu style kick sequence, and see if we got better in the waking state. In that study, 81.3% of participants got better, had improved martial arts performance by training in their lucid dream. That's an average, 81.3. Embarrassingly, I was one of the 19% who didn't get any better for my sins. I don't know why. I did it properly. I got lucid. I did the kick sequence, but anyway, I didn't seem to get any better. But 81.3% did. That's crazy. This really shows that we can change our brain through lucid dreaming. But so what? Who wants to do more squats? Who wants to do a kick sequence? Well, let's apply that to other things. There are other ways, other methodologies that we can use to strengthen exactly the same brain networks. Imagine if you spend your lucid dreams practicing compassion. Imagine if you spend your lucid dreams practicing meditation. Imagine if you use your lucid dreams to transform the glaciers, the mind poisons, to change habitual tendencies. You're not just dreaming about changing those habitual tendencies. You're not just dreaming about strengthening your meditation practice. As far as your brain is concerned, you are actually doing that. Kind of makes me think in some of these more advanced Tibetan dream yoga practices, there are things where you become lucid and you transform yourself into the form of the deity. So let's say transform yourself into a Buddha, for example. And if the scientists are correct, from the brain's point of view, we didn't imagine that we transformed into a Buddha. We actually transformed into a Buddha. Now, I would love to see what's going on an fMRI scanner when someone does that. But who knows? Any funders out there, let us know. Let's do that study. In fact, last time I made that joke, that exact joke, when I looked at the camera and said, any funders out there, let us know, was for a PTSD healing study. And someone was watching the webinar who was a funder, and they funded us to do the latest healing PTSD study with Institute of Noetic Sciences in America. And those results come out very soon, in a couple of weeks, and they were remarkable. This is a bit of a tangent, but I think the webinar audience might like this. We did a study with 55 people, all of whom had PTSD, so kind of card-carrying, in-treatment PTSD. We spent a week teaching them to lucid dream. And if they had a lucid dream, they were to engage a healing within the lucid dream, calling out an affirmation of healing intent, embracing or showing love to any wounded or distressed dream characters, or if they became lucid within one of their recurring PTSD nightmares, to know, this is a nightmare, this isn't real, to be empowered by that. And then if they move towards the nightmare or change the nightmare, although moving towards it had much better results. What we found at the end of that 1 week study was not only over 80% of people had a lucid dream within that 1 week, which was brilliant, but a lot of that 80% managed to have a healing lucid dream. And the effect on the PTSD score was remarkable. By the end of the 1 week study, the average PTSD score for those lucid dreamers had dropped so low, it was below the PTSD threshold. Then 3 weeks later, when we did a follow-up study, it had dropped 1 point below that. So the average PTSD score had dropped so low through the power of lucid dream healing, it was no longer within the PTSD threshold range. Yeah, little tangent, but a very important one. So we know what lucid dreaming is. We know some of the neuroscience of lucid dreaming. We now know that it can be used to treat PTSD and trauma. Let's look at how it really feels. This is the weird thing about lucid dreaming. You might imagine that once you become lucid in the dream, oh, wow, I'm dreaming. It will people imagine it will look like how a dream looks in a Hollywood movie. In Hollywood movies, when they do dream sequence and they do soft focus and smoke and stuff, that is the opposite of how a lucid dream feels. If you really wanted to show a lucid dream or a dream sequence in a Hollywood movie, you would go from normal definition, boom, to HD super high res definition, because that's how it feels in a lucid dream. When you become lucid, the reason that many people wake up so quickly is the shock. Not simply the shock that they become fully conscious within their unconscious mind, but the shock of how realistic it looks. The lucid dream looks not just as real as this, but in many ways even more real than this. Because right now our experience of everyday reality is being filtered by the 5 sense organs and maybe the 6th too, right? Maybe you wear glasses. Maybe like me, you've only got 30% hearing in one ear. Maybe your sense of taste is getting a bit less as we get older. I'm starting to feel that one too. So we know that our experience of reality, this reality, is not actually complete. It is limited by the 5 sense organs. However, in the lucid dream state, those limits are removed. Why? Because in the lucid dream, you're not seeing through your eyes, you're seeing through your mind. In the lucid dream, you're not hearing through your ears, you're hearing through your mind. In the lucid dream, you're not touching through the senses in your fingers, you're touching through your mind. This is why people often in their lucid dreams say, God, the colors were so bright. How come I could see every detail on that blade of grass? How come the music I heard in a lucid dream was so kind of all-encompassing? And of course, for many people, how come sex in a lucid dream becomes so seductively amazing? Because you're not having an orgasm, you're having a mindgasm. So the lucid dream state is incredibly realistic. So please drop any notion that it's going to be dreamy. It's going to be HD hyperreal. But within the lucid dream, you have full awareness that what you are experiencing is a dream. And if you go beyond that, full awareness that everything you're experiencing is a 3-dimensional hallucinatory projection of your own mind. When you wake up from that, and then you hear the teachings from the sages of old and the sages of present, in fact, who say what we believe to be reality is in fact a dreamlike illusion empty of inherent existence, it becomes much, much easier to understand. Now, I have zero experience of the truth of shunyata, the truth of emptiness, right? But in a lucid dream, at least I have some some practical experience of it. And we all can too. How? Simply touch something. Become lucid in your dream. Oh, I'm dreaming. Oh, this is so cool. I can't wait to tell Charlie about this. I'll email him tomorrow. You can have that level of awareness. And the chance of you having a lucid dream after this webinar is very high. You just maximize your potential, because so often lucid dreaming is something we've simply forgotten how to do. And when you get a big reminder like this webinar, often that night you might get lucid. So maybe get lucid tonight. Oh, I'm dreaming. Wow, this is so realistic. What time did I go to bed? Well, I went to bed about 11 a.m. and then I woke up to pee and then I dropped back to sleep and now I'm lucid. You can have full awareness of the past. You can also have full awareness of the future. Oh, I can't wait to email Charlie about this in the morning and tell him I got lucid after his webinar. Great. So full awareness of the past, full awareness of the future, full present state awareness. Once you're in this state, what I suggest you do in the lucid dream to really experience this truth of the pure potentiality of all things, the emptiness, the shunyata, just find a table or something hard and just tap on it. That's enough. And then just consider what's happening. The table does not exist. The hand that is knocking on the table does not exist. The sound that the table makes when you knock on it does not exist. And yet it seems to. This idea within Buddhism of form, emptiness, form is perfectly encapsulated in the lucid dream. It has form, like the table is solid. Your hand won't go straight through it unless you intend it to go straight through it. So it clearly has form. And yet, simultaneously, this form is empty of inherent existence. It is dreamlike. It is created by the projections of the mind. So in a very quick and simple way, you can have, I believe, a practical experience of the truth of emptiness, even though I have no theoretical, really practical understanding of it in the waking state. In the lucid dream, there's a shortcut to that little experience. So we know what the lucid dream is. We know how it feels. It feels incredibly realistic. When I learned to lucid dream, I was just past 15, kind of 16, 17. I'd been reading a little bit about Buddhism, but hadn't really got into it. I remember thinking, God, this looks like hard work. But it seemed like a good idea. I thought maybe I'll do it when I'm a bit older. And I've been reading about lucid dreaming since I was 14, 15. For my 12th birthday, I asked for this thing called the Nova Dreamer, which is this electronic sleep mask that you put on your face, and it flashes red lights, which penetrate the eyelids, come into the dream, and the dream becomes full of, it's often white, actually, it's not red, it's often kind of white light. And then you go, oh, that's the dream mask, and you can have a lucid dream. I asked for one of those my 12th birthday. So I was one of those weird kids who was into this stuff from really young. So I'd been aware of lucid dreaming. But before I got into Buddhism, what else is a 15-year-old kid going to use their lucid dreams for? It's incredibly realistic. You can control what you want to do. There's no one there to judge you. There's no social norms. So, of course, I use it for two main things: sex and skateboarding. Now, interestingly, those neuroscience things that I learned about later, I got pretty good at skateboarding. The other thing, not so much. But skateboarding I got very good at. So the first couple of years of me finding lucid dreaming was just like sexual fantasy and skateboarding and flying about and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's really missing the point. You know, it's such a sacred space, the lucid dreaming space. So to use it just for kind of sex and messing about and sport and stuff, I think might be missing a really valuable opportunity. And actually touching on the neuroscience things, as a 15, 16-year-old, having all that kind of, you know, crazy sex and lucid dream, think what that was doing to my neural pathways. And when I think about some of the, you know, kind of treacherous sexual relationships I got into later as a teen, yeah, maybe I was not helping my brain by engaging that. So see it as a sacred space if you can. You need not make the same mistakes I did. You know, I'm here to tell you these stories so you don't fall into the same pitfalls, not so you fall into the same ones. Accessibility. When we start to mention these ideas of exploring emptiness and stuff like this, it can seem like lucid dreaming might be inaccessible. In fact, it is a very, very accessible modality. It's one that almost everybody has accessed before. How do we know that? Because children naturally lucid dream. So Harvard Medical School did two studies on this, a follow-up and the main one, that concluded that children of the ages of 6 to 16 reported spontaneous lucid dreams as part of their childhood brain development. Basically, lucid dreams are normal. Not every child and not every night, and only from the ages of 6 to 16. When I inquired why they started at 6, apparently if you ask a 5-year-old about their dreams, they're often not clear as to what's a dream and what's imagination. You ask a 5-year-old your dreams, they'll say, oh, I dream of Santa and unicorns, and they basically just list their favorite things. You ask a 6-year-old and they kind of seem to have that awareness of the dreams at night and, fantasies. So it may be from much younger. But what we know for sure is that lucid dreaming is normal and is a spontaneous arising of the childhood mind. That leads to two very interesting insights. Number one, lucid dreaming is not an alien imposition that you force upon the mind. It's nothing bad. It's nothing the mind has never experienced before. It is natural and normal. And number two, you don't need to learn how to lucid dream. You need to remember. Think about that. I used to speak French as a kid, and I started relearning it recently. And I found it much easier to relearn. Why? Because I used to speak it as a kid. Hadn't spoken it for 20, 25 years, but there was enough of kind of stored French language or French experience in my unconscious. When I started learning again, it was much easier. Now, let's say I started to try to learn Japanese, a language of which I have no experience from my childhood. Think how much more difficult that would be. The cool thing is, everybody listening, the language of lucidity is already in your unconscious. You don't need to learn how to lucid dream. You need to remember. This is why quite a lot of the techniques that I use to teach lucid dreaming are quite playful. You know, there's one where I ask you to draw pictures and kind of art therapy and stuff like that. The reason for that is because the dominant internal archetype that first experienced lucid dreaming was the inner child for many people. So we can use the inner child through the techniques to contact that innate part of ourselves that remembers how to lucid dream. Keep it playful. You know, if you go to bed tonight, go, I must have a lucid dream. I must have a lucid dream. Look at my body. You're not even going to be able to sleep, let alone have a lucid dream. Whereas if you fall asleep with a childlike wonder, go, wow, imagine if what he said is true. Imagine if I can use the lucid dream to work with my trauma. Imagine if I can use the lucid dream to get better at my sports. Imagine if I can use the lucid dream to be kinder, to explore my internal archetypes. If you go to sleep with that sense of wonder, you're far more likely to have a lucid dream than any kind of rigid, I must have a lucid dream. So we know what it is. We know how it feels. We know how accessible it can be. We know the neuroscience of it. And now I just finally, in this early introduction, want to touch on the spiritual benefits, which I've kind of done already. Lucid dreaming was not invented in 1975 at Hull University in the UK. It was scientifically verified. And so often scientific verification is actually the last thing to come in a long line of practice history. It's a great thing when it happens because, of course, as the Dalai Lama said, to scientifically prove these spiritual practices is to offer people more faith in the practice, not less, because we can say, oh, it's real. That's why he encourages this work. Lucid dreaming has a long ancient history. Within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it goes back at least 1,000 years. And in fact, in the Tibetan tradition, it goes back about 1,000 before then, because the Bön indigenous tradition of Tibet had a lot of dream work practices already, even before the Vajrayana Buddhism from northern India came up and met it. So Tibetan Buddhism is quite unique in its collection of dream work practices. But you also find lucid dreaming in Sufism, going back about 500 years. Not so much in Orthodox Islam, but in Sufism. You find it in the Toltec Mexica tradition of ancient Mexico, which again is about 1,000 years old. So maybe the same kind of timeline as Tantric Buddhism into Tibet. You may find it in early Christianity. The jury's out on this. If you look at the Nag Hammadi texts, which were discovered, often called the heretical gospels, some of them use the metaphor of the lucid dream. Now, that doesn't mean there was definitely lucid dream practice, but it seems possible if the central metaphor you're using are things like wake up. How can you bear to be asleep when it is your duty to awaken from this dream of life? That sounds pretty much like a lucid dream type thing, right? So possibly it's in early esoteric or Gnostic Christianity. And I'm sure many other traditions as well. But the important thing to know is this is an old craft. An old craft. That was actually a term given to me in a lucid dream once. I was in a lucid dream and I saw a big statue of this Buddhist saint and Buddha called Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. But it was a statue. He wasn't animated. And beneath the statue, it said old craft. And I thought, oh yeah, this dream yoga thing, this lucid dreaming thing is an old craft. So this term dream yoga, in Tibetan, it is Milam Naljor. Milam means dream, and Naljor is often translated as yoga, but a better translation might be natural state, which is actually even really cool, kind of the natural state of dreaming. Because from a Buddhist point of view, the strange thing isn't lucidity. The strange thing is non-lucidity. The essence of the mind is cognizant awareness. So it's strange that we are not lucid in all our dreams. Very different from the Western notion that lucidity is kind of a novel thing. In Buddhism, the possibility is to be lucid in all dreams. And these great masters, every one of their dreams, they're lucid, just like in every moment of their life, they're lucid. It's not that they go to sleep and practice lucid dreaming. It's that the continuous awareness of mind just carries on. It has no differentiation between awake and sleep. And then apparently at an even higher level, dreams stop because there's no karma that needs to be expressed or exhausted. So there's no dreams, they're just clear light the whole night. And the only dream these masters do have will either be prophetic dreams or lucid dreams for some specific practice that they want to do. So it's a very ancient practice. Dream yoga, Milam Naljor, is traditionally in some of the lineages, in fact, the lineage of I'm part, although I'm Nyingma and Kagyu, in the Kagyu lineage, dream yoga is almost exclusively taught on the 3-year retreat. So it can be quite difficult to get dream yoga teachings outside of long retreat. In the older schools of Buddhism, it's taught a little bit more openly. And I found in the last kind of 10, 15 years, there's been a real opening up around the dream yoga practices. Alan Wallace is teaching it now and writing brilliant books about it. The amazing Andrew Holacek is teaching it. I've been teaching it in my own way in some parts of dream yoga. So it is starting to open up now. The fundamental differences, though, between lucid dreaming and dream yoga, although they may start like this, they diverge greatly. Like a lot of the lucid dreaming techniques, the Western lucid dreaming techniques, are almost identical to the Tibetan Buddhist ones in their kind of methodology. The techniques are similar, but the real diversion happens when you become lucid. The thought of using your lucid dream within the Tibetan Buddhist dream yoga tradition, the thought of using your lucid dream to practice squats or to get better at martial arts or to have normal, non-Kama Mudra style sex is crazy. The first thing you would do within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition upon lucidity is to do your spiritual practice in the lucid dream. And that might be literally sitting and meditating in the lucid dream, or transforming a deity self-manifestation, so transforming yourself into the deity of the lucid dream, or exploring emptiness, which might be actually something as simple as my thing with tapping on the table, but obviously within a much broader view. Whereas within the lucid dreaming Western scientific tradition, it's really about psychological integration, which I think is brilliant and holds just as many benefits. Maybe not benefits for many lifetimes, but for this lifetime, some brilliant benefits. I mentioned already the powerful, powerful integration of post-traumatic stress disorder that we can engage through lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming can also be used for exploration of the psyche. So if you're interested in kind of Jungian archetypes, there's the ability to go into the lucid dream and actually meet these archetypes. So you can meet your inner child. And in fact, in the PTSD study that I mentioned before, although there were a lot of military veterans on that study, there were many civilians too, non-military people, and many of them were working with sexual trauma. And we were discussing how best to meet, integrate, and heal sexual trauma within a lucid dream. And we realized that actually kind of calling out, trauma come to me, which might seem the most rational thing because it can come to you, you can embrace it, you can integrate it, was too strong. And we needed some sort of buffer zone. So the buffer zone we created was to work with the archetypes. So this is a nice dream plan for anyone looking to use lucid dreaming for sexual trauma healing, to become lucid and to call out for the inner child, not the trauma itself, but the internal archetype that was most likely affected or wounded by the trauma. Heal the wounded child and you heal the effect of the trauma, not ever needing to even know what the trauma was. Because a lot of people couldn't remember the trauma. And we realized, well, actually, you don't need to remember it. We can go straight to the healing of the internal archetype without needing to actually face or re-experience that trauma. And that had a very, very powerful healing effect. I just want to do a little bit more on that, actually. I think there might be someone listening who needs to hear this for some reason. I'm going to follow my intuition on that. In my third book, Dreaming Through Darkness, which is looking at shadow integration, as well as lucid dreaming, but mainly shadow integration work. There's a case study that I share there from a woman who wanted to work with her sexual abuse trauma. And we were on a retreat in Wales. And it was the first night. We'd barely learned any lucid dreaming techniques. In fact, we just had an introductory talk a bit like this. But she went to sleep with this sense of, wow, remember I said that's the way to have lucid dreams. She went to sleep thinking, well, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can meet the part of myself that was wounded by the abuse. So she made a dream plan, and her dream plan was to meet her 7-year-old self. And when I asked her why the 7-year-old self, it was because at that age, it was at that age that some of the abuse happened. So she thought she would call out to meet her 7-year-old self, and she'd heard me talk about hugging things. Here's another nice takeaway. If in doubt, hug everything in your lucid dream. Hug everything. Everything is you. So if you become lucid, I don't know what to do. I can't remember all these things. He said, hug things, hug the people, hug the trees, hug the table, and not just hug, show love. I'm just using hug as the symbolic representation of love. Go around showing love, doing metta practice, compassion, loving kindness practice, and everything you see. So her plan was to become lucid, to call forth her 7-year-old self, would appear as a little girl. She imagined she would hug her, say, it wasn't your fault, and she'd wake up and be cured. Sounds fantastical. Actually, what happened was not far off at all, but with some very interesting changes. She became lucid that night, in fact. Again, which is why just after watching this webinar, some of you may well get lucid tonight. So plan what you want to do. She became lucid and she called out in the dream, 7-year-old self, come to me. I want to meet my 7-year-old self. Nothing. Called out second time, 7-year-old self, come to me. Nothing. Called out third time. Now, there is an interesting kind of rule of 3 in lucid dreams, for some people. Who knows? I've just seen it as a pattern emerging. She called out a third time. But this time, no girl appeared, but a door appeared. Matrix style just suddenly appeared in front of her. And on the door was a sign. And on the sign, it said, caution. Just think about that intelligence of the dream for a minute there. When we're working with the lucid dream, we're not dealing with a lower intelligence than the waking state. In many ways, we're dealing with a higher intelligence than the waking state. Because the mind that we're interacting with in the lucid dream is the mind beyond the ego limitations of the waking state. The unconscious mind, and we know this from scientific studies, is like a huge data hard drive of experience. Every book you've ever read, every spiritual teaching you've ever been to, every Theosophical Society lecture you've ever heard or been to, all of that is stored in the unconscious mind, in this huge library of knowledge and library of wisdom. In the lucid dream states, like you get the key to that library. Now, it can take a while to open the lock and to find out where all the books are kept, but you get the keys to the library. There is a higher intelligence you're working with in there. And something about that higher intelligence knew it was not a good idea for her to meet a personification of that wounded child. It blocked her in many ways. It gave her a door with the word caution on it. And she was so sweet. She said, I was in the lucid dream and I saw the door with caution. I thought, what would Charlie say to do? And I was like, Charlie would say to go through the door. And she thought, well, if there's a lock on the door, of course, big symbol, a lock. If there's a lock, I won't go through. But she saw the door was slightly ajar. It hadn't been shut properly. Interesting. So she thought, okay, with caution, I'll push it. She pushed the door. As she went through, the freestanding door, boom, 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 manifested this building, 3-story building. And she intuitively knew, as well as kind of looking up, that on each story of each floor of the building was a different symbolic representation of the abuse, and that she could work through these different stages. And on the ground floor where she was, there was a room full of vomit. And a trigger warning on this, I'm going to explain some of the abuse that happened to her very lightly, with a light touch. There was an element of the abuse where she was forced to eat too much, to eat until she was sick. So this room covered with vomit on the floor, she instantly knew what it represented. And again, so sweet, she walked into the room and said, oh God, how do I hug it? You know, I get on the floor and hug it. It doesn't matter. It's not about a real hug, is it? It's all about metaphor. It's about symbol. So she hugged it with her affirmation. She walked into the room and she called out, oh, I set you free. It wasn't your fault. I set you free. Brilliant affirmations. You know, just what that wounded child needed to hear. And she called out, I set you free. And then she wakes up. It becomes very, very intense and she wakes up. That was the only lucid dream she ever had. I've kept in contact with her. When I wrote the book, I needed to get her permission to include the dream. We kept in contact afterwards. And as far as I know, that is the only lucid dream she ever had. And when I kind of inquired about this, she said, why would I have another one? You know, I used it to do what I learned. I came to lucid dreaming to want to heal this, and I did it. Yeah, I mean, there's truth in that, I would say. Carry on. There's loads of other stuff we can heal, but whatever. From my knowledge, she only had one lucid dream. So this is really important to the frequency of lucid dreaming. You don't need to be lucid dreaming every single night. If you can, brilliant. And some high practitioners, I'm sure, do. But even if you just have one lucid dream in your life, that can still change it. One lucid dream a month, 12 a year, brilliant. Let alone if you get to the stage of kind of 1 or 2 lucid dreams a week. And that's a stage, you know, I'm no more advanced than that. But still, a lucid dream a week, 50 lucid dreams a year over the years, I think that's brilliant. That's more than enough to do some real internal work. So don't get too caught up on the frequency of these. Think just one lucid dream can change your life, and it really can. Now, the lady in question, when I asked her if I could include that dream, she said, yeah, but I need to tell you that lucid dream didn't heal me. And I was like, oh, I thought you said it did. That's why I'm putting it in the book. She said, no, the lucid dream didn't. It wasn't like she woke up the next day on that retreat and suddenly all her trauma triggers were gone and it was fully integrated. But she said after that lucid dream, it was like the part of her. Oh no, she said that. She said after the lucid dream, she woke up and all of the obstacles that prevented her healing had been removed. Suddenly, seeing a therapist seemed like a really good idea. Whereas before the lucid dream, it seemed something she wanted to push away. Suddenly, talking to the family members involved seemed like something she could do. Whereas before, it was definitely nothing she could do. She said the lucid dream removed the obstacles to healing so that healing could occur in the waking state. And the last time I spoke to her, she was about to have Christmas, actually, with some of the family members involved. So deep had the familial healing be. So yeah, we can use lucid dreaming for sex and skateboarding and doing squats and martial arts, or you can use it for healing deep psychological trauma and doing deep spiritual work. It is an old craft, and it is being presented now, hopefully in a way that we can appreciate it in these modern times and use it for worldly, secular, as well as deeply religious and spiritual ends. It is a powerful practice. It is accessible to everybody, and it is something that you can teach yourself to do. This is a learnable skill, not just by remembering you used to do it as a kid, but it is a learnable skill. So there is almost like a formula that you can follow. If you follow the formula, eventually you will have a lucid dream, but there are easier ways. The other way is just to have pure enthusiasm. You know, what the Greeks called enthusiasmos, which is beautifully translated as possessed by the gods. Isn't that cool? The ancient Greeks thought that when you met someone who was enthusiastic, they weren't a bit too much or a bit extra, as I don't know why I'm thinking that, but actually they were possessed by the gods. They had the gods within them. So you can either follow the formula, that works, or you can just be really, really enthusiastic and that works. What I promote and what I suggest is somewhere in the middle, is using effective techniques from both the Western scientific tradition and the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, combined with a childlike joy and enthusiasmos. If you bring those together, you have something that really, really works. And it has worked for thousands, if not tens of thousands now, I think, of people I've taught to do this. Nightmare integration is one of the great, great benefits of lucid dreaming. So if you do know anyone who is suffering from nightmares, and it really is suffering, you know, I've had terrible nightmares myself, and the thought of being scared to go to sleep, when something in your waking state has happened that is so terrifying, and yet that is compounded by being scared to go to sleep because the nightmares, the night terrors come. It's really one of the worst human suffering. So I have a real personal mission to help people with nightmares. And I should say, actually, that's how I first got into lucid dreaming. Probably should have said this at the beginning, but I just jumped straight in. The first time I realized that lucid dreaming was more than kind of sex and skateboarding was when I was 17. And before I got into Buddhism, I was really wild. It was almost as if something in me knew that the Buddhism was going to become my path. And so I would have one final hurrah kind of thing. I don't know, but I did get very wild just before I got into Buddhism. Gangs and drugs and all sorts of, mildly criminal activities and stuff, really quite wild. And in one of those instances, I had a drugs overdose and a full-blown near-death experience. The classic tunnel it wasn't actually light, but this tunnel with all photos of me getting younger and younger and younger, kind of like the life review. And at the tunnel ended and I was given a choice, this loud, booming voice in this infinite blackness, like it had never begun and it had never ended and would never. Infinite blackness. And this booming voice that was my voice, weirdly. Maybe all of us, maybe God at the end of time is just us, right? Who knows? But it was my voice and it said, Charlie, do you want to live or do you want to die? And I remember going, live. And felt like I was yelling. I don't think I was. And then I heard this like drum thing going, boom, 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 boom. And I now realize, well, I kind of realized in the moment too, because then I woke up out of it. It was my heartbeat starting. It wasn't a drum roll. It was like, and then I woke up and there were people standing over me and all this kind of stuff. So proper like near-death experience from this drugs overdose. And I think Now, if I had one with context and practice, I'm not sure whether you ever enjoy a near-death experience, but I might even be open to it. But at 17, I was not. It was terrifying, and it was horrible, and it was traumatic. And it led to really bad nightmares and panic attacks in the daytime. And the panic attacks led me to really get into Buddhism to try and work with them. And the nightmares led me to look at lucid dreaming as something much more than just sex and skateboarding. And in these lucid dreaming books I've been reading, all of them had a chapter on how you could use lucid dreaming to integrate nightmares. So I remember flicking through these Stephen LaBerge books, finding the chapters, and it basically said, if you become lucid in a nightmare, rather than running away, rather than pushing away the nightmare or being frozen, move towards it. Actively remind yourself, empower yourself with the knowledge. This is not real. It is a nightmare. It is just my mind. I cannot be harmed, but it is my mind. Empower yourself with that. And I did manage to become lucid within one of these recurring nightmares, which I had for 3 or 4 months after the NDE. And I managed to become lucid, and I faced the source of the nightmare. And I know I'm supposed to hug it and stuff now, but at 17, I didn't know that. So I actually kind of just yelled at it. But in that yelling, it was really empowering. I was like, off, this is my dream. But the face of the demon, it was where this demon would appear, who represented death, just changed. And he went, like that. And then the dream turned into this vision of paradise. And the nightmare stopped. They never, ever came back. Well, in different forms, but not from that near-death experience. I never had another nightmare again linked to that. So at 17, I knew this stuff could be powerful. So my kind of genesis story of lucid dreaming has always been linked to nightmares. So it wouldn't be right for me to give an introductory talk without mentioning this. If you know someone who's struggling with nightmares, lucid dreaming is one of the most powerful interventions for the treatment of PTSD nightmares. If you or they already have a stabilized sleeping pattern, then you can jump straight into lucid dreaming. If the PTSD is leading to a destabilized sleeping pattern, then actually my new book, Wake Up to Sleep, is all about that. It's got 5 practices. 4 of them are about stabilizing sleep. The 5th one is lucid dreaming. And I call that practice mindfulness of dream and sleep. So the mindfulness of dream and sleep would be better for that. But please let them know there is hope. It is possible. This new study with IONS proves this beyond a doubt. People's PTSD scores dropping below the threshold after practicing healing lucid dreaming. Really important to spread the word on this, because nightmares can be really debilitating for people's mental health. And I really want people to know there is a way through it.
Well, I hope you really enjoyed that presentation. I certainly did. Charlie Morley is a terrific speaker with quite a story and a lot of experience and information to share. I would like to definitely encourage you to register for his workshop. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. It'll be on a Saturday afternoon. So in addition to knowing about lucid dreaming, you will actually be able to experience some of his techniques. Do consider joining us for that workshop. I'd also like to invite you to join us for next week's lecture, when we will have our own Richard Smalley, the editor of Quest magazine, who will be speaking on the origins of Gnosticism. I know that you know of Richard, and you know that he's an excellent presenter. Please do join us next week. In the meantime, stay safe, be well. Good night to you all.